Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me here. It's really nice to talk about Stanley Thompson at a Stanley Thompson golf course at Islington. Yeah, I've played here many times over the years, and what I really like about Islington is the way it does honor Stanley's memory and the history of the golf course. You know, you don't always walk into older golf courses even that have all over their walls, pictures, architectural plans, renderings, that sort of a thing. I think it's a kind of a forgotten side of, I don't know, what word would you use, decorating golf clubs, making members aware of their history. And of course, we have so many older clubs in Canada, and I think one of the things the Stanley Thompson Society is doing well and trying to do all of the time is to make people appreciate architecture, help people appreciate architecture all the more. I was playing the other day at my club, Maple Downs, with a friend of mine who's not a member. I took him out late Saturday evening, great time to play, 5 o'clock, and we wandered around the course. And he's not really a student of architecture. He's smart, he's a family physician, but he plays mostly public golf courses, and he's played Maple Downs a number of times with our friends. And I was trying to point out to him all of the features of the golf course. It's a William Mitchell golf course. I know we're here to talk about Stanley Thompson, but my larger point is that once you understand and appreciate golf course architecture and what you're trying to do with golf holes, I think it's like appreciating music or art or film. You can understand it that much better and enjoy it that much more. So I'm always preaching to the unconverted, you might say, about that one. I'm sure I get kind of boring with my friends and say, look at this hole, the way it's moving. Look at this, what Ian tried to do at Maple Downs recently with some of the bringing out the ground contours. Anyway, Stanley Thompson, I do want to talk about his creativity, and I even made a couple of notes. I'll probably not even look at them, but I wanted to start with a quote from Doug Carrick, who I first met at Uplands, the Stanley Thompson course, when I was a kid. And of course, Doug has gone on to have a very successful career as a golf course architect. And this is what he wrote just at the beginning in his introduction to a book that was published in 2007 called The Golf Courses of Stanley Thompson. I'm sure most of you have seen it. It's a large format coffee table book with a lot of good photos in there. Anyway, this is what he wrote. The design work of legendary golf course architect Stanley Thompson has for a long time had a tremendous influence on my life. Even before I'd heard the name Stanley Thompson, his courses were providing me with the inspiration to pursue a career in golf. And as I was thinking about this talk tonight and about Stanley Thompson, I realized that Stanley Thompson had a great effect on me as a golfer, player, and certainly as a writer for my entire career, the way I look at the game, the way I look at golf courses. I was lucky enough to grow up at Uplands, and I'd still be a member there, I'm sure, if it weren't kind of destroyed for 9 holes, only a few of which really are well, a lot of them are the original holes, but they've been kind of messed up over the years, and it takes an old member there to know what it was like. But it was a fantastic place to grow up and learn about golf course architecture and Stanley Thompson. And I was in what I would call right there, as most of you are familiar with, the golden triangle or the great triumvirate, whatever you want to call it, of 3 Stanley Thompson courses. There was Uplands, then just to the south of it was the Thornhill Golf Club, also Stanley Thompson, and across was the Ladies Golf Club. So to really have those 3 Stanley Thompson golf courses within a 2-minute walk of one another was really fantastic for a young golfer who didn't know he was going to grow up to be a writer. But I just absorbed the spirit, I think, of what Stanley Thompson was doing. And while I was thinking about this particular talk and his creativity, I started thinking about the notion of championship golf courses. And when you think about it, Stanley Thompson designed very few what you would call championship golf courses. In other words, golf courses that went on to host professional golf tournaments. That's what I'm thinking about. I went through all of his golf courses and I made a list of the courses of his that have hosted mostly Canadian Opens, or in one case, what was called the Labatt's International for the Canadian PGA Championship. Here's the tournaments, the pro tournaments that have been at courses designed solely by Stanley Thompson. I'm not thinking of some renovation work or modernizing work that he might have done for some Canadian Opens. St. George's, of course, has hosted the most Canadian Opens of a Thompson course 5 times. first in 1933, the last in 2010, and they had to do some, kind of goofy things to St. George just to make it hold up for 2010. And then the members anyway were upset that they were shooting 60, a couple of guys there at the Canadian Open. Thornhill in 1945, where Byron Nelson won his last of 11 straight tournaments, a record that'll probably never be broken. Westmount, which had the Canadian Open in 1957, and the Canadian PGA Championship that I mentioned in 1981. I caddied in that one, and Ray Floyd won it. I played it just last week again for the first time. It must have been 25 years or so, and what a fantastic place. So when you think about other architects, think about Donald Ross or A.W. Tillinghast. They have their own societies, of course, but for whatever reason, their golf courses have hosted a lot of major championships, and just plain old championships or tournaments or classics, the way every PGA tournament calls itself. When you think about Tillinghast, you think about Oakmont, Winged Foot, Baltusrol. They've all hosted U.S. Opens, PGA championships. Donald Ross, of course, we could stand here for a long time and talk about his courses that have hosted major championships. But Stanley Thompson courses, no. And here's why I think that's the case. It's not only the length of the golf courses, all those golf courses that I mentioned, they might be too short now as well, but they were designed and have held national championships. Stanley Thompson, I think, he didn't have the pressure on him, and probably most of the earlier architects in Canada anyway, there was no pressure then like there is right now to build a championship golf course. Tom Fazio has said that the easiest thing in the world to do is to build a really, really tough golf course. A golf course where, maybe Aaron Hill's in a couple of weeks next week at the U.S. Open. You'll see, it'll be interesting to see how the USGA sets it up. If they want par to be the winning score or around there's a lot of things they can do with that golf course. But Thompson, his golf courses, I think, reflect his essential attribute. I spoke about creativity, and I mean that in a global sense, but how do you get to build golf courses that everybody really, really enjoys? People come off a Thompson golf course and they say, man, I had a lot of fun at that golf course. That was really a treat to play. I didn't get beat up. It was challenging. There were all kinds of angles I had to look at. One thing in this book I did with Tiger, he talks a lot about the changes to Augusta National over the years, and how if they played, the book is specifically about his 1997 Masters when he won by 12 shots, but he says if they played now, the Augusta National they played in 97 with the equipment they have now, that they'd be shooting in the 50s. They'd be breaking 60 at Augusta National. So unfortunately, they've had to modify Augusta National quite a bit over the years and take out some of the kind of shots that were available then. It looks the same, but it's a very, very different golf course, according to Tiger and other players, than it was in 97. A lot of Stanley Thompson golf courses haven't really changed because they haven't held national championships, and because they were meant solely to be fun. They were meant solely, I call what Stanley Thompson had, I think, as his fundamental attribute, his playfulness. A lot of you know what kind of a person Stanley was. He liked to drink, or two or three. He had his problems with money, but he was kind of a larger than life figure, and what he really liked to do with land was bring out the kind of playfulness in it. When I grew up at Uplands, there was so much that I could go through the entire golf course now, 30 years after I've left there, and think about all of the different shots I had at, or a player had at Uplands that were just pure fun. That's why at the beginning of every year, Uplands hosted it was only 6,000 yards. Actually, it was 5998 or something, and at one point they really wanted to get it over 6,000. So they stretched a couple of holes and it got up to 6,020 yards, I think. Well, this tournament was called the Eager Beaver. It started every Ontario amateur circuit. I played in it. I never won it, but I played in it a lot. But Gary Cowan played in it. Mo Norman, when he was an amateur, played in it. Jerry Kesselring, all of the top amateurs in Ontario played the Eager Beaver because they wanted to play a Stanley Thompson golf course. It felt right to us that should be the golf course that started the Ontario amateur golf season. So when I think about Uplands, I'm trying to present like word pictures. I haven't got a PowerPoint presentation, anything like that. I guess I'm a word person more than anything. So I think of the first hole, and I can still see it, where seems like a simple hole, 320 yards, something like that. A river running down there, maybe 210 yards out. So you'd lay up, and then the second shot, was up to an elevated green without a bunker on it, as I recall. Stanley Thompson built a lot of holes that didn't have bunkers on them because he used the ground contours. You could feed the ball in one way or another. If the green went from back to front, you'd hit it towards the back of the green. If you hit it with the right spin, it might spin back towards the hole. And I have a particular affection for that hole because one year during the club championship, I shot the first 3 rounds. I shot 71, 77, 70, and I led the club championship going into the last round. But on that simple first hole, I hit a 2-iron down there, and I had a 9-iron or a wedge in. And then, of course, over the ball, my head started spinning instead of the golf ball. And I started thinking about all kinds of different golf swings, which was probably my problem the whole year, and it's why I became a golf writer as opposed to a serious golf competitor. Although I won a few tournaments, but still. And I remember I double bogeyed that hole, and I shot 78 the last round, and I finished 4th. And I think one of the Islington members, I think he's still here, Cal George, won that Uplands Club Championship. A funny story about that is I was so kind of disturbed by the fact that I shot 78 in the last round, but more than that, that I couldn't kind of come up with the shots that Stanley required because I got anxious out there. So doing what a writer does, I came home and I wrote a long piece about that club championship experience. Then I got the idea to send it off to Golf Digest, to an editor there. I won't mention his name. I didn't hear from him for a while. He's from Montreal, actually, but he was working on, as an editor at Golf Digest. And then he wrote me back and he said he really liked the piece. You know, back then when you can write a 5,000-word piece, now it would have to be 500 words or maybe, you know, a tweet storm or something. Anyway, he wrote me back. He said, hey, this is good, man. You're really getting into, you know, the kind of golf course it is, the shots that you tried on this golf course that maybe you shouldn't have tried in the club championship, the fact that you took probably more risks than you needed to because the architect tempted you into it. Anyway, he said he'd like to publish the piece. And he told me what issue it would be, and I waited and waited and waited. It was never published. I tried to get a hold of him, never heard from him. Remember, this is the first article I'm trying to get published in a major magazine, major golf magazine. And I never did hear from him. Finally, I wrote to the main editor, and I said, what happened? You know, I mean, come on, tell me. Surely I deserve, you know, a little more respect than this. Let me know what happened. Well, it turned out that the guy had fled his family, and fled the magazine, and nobody at the magazine ever heard from him again. So that article never got published. So it wasn't the most auspicious debut as a writer. But what had happened to me in that last round was purely because of what Stanley had done. There were, as I say, the course was barely 6,000 yards. I remember the second hole over a valley and a gully, and right behind the green was the Thornhill Golf Club, where I used to skip over the fence sometimes to see just what Thornhill was all about. I remember one time I skipped over there climbed the fence. I mean, I just hopped over the fence on a Sunday afternoon, late Sunday, and play a few holes by myself at Thornhill to see what another Stanley Thompson course was like. There was really nobody on the golf course. It was late on a Sunday afternoon or early evening in the summer, but I did see kind of in the distance a man walking with a younger person. I couldn't tell if it was a young girl or a young boy, probably one of his kids. And whatever he saw, he knew I wasn't a member. So about half an hour later, somebody from the police showed up to escort me off the golf course. I said, come on, I'm just a kid trying to learn a little bit more about architecture. But he sent me off the golf course. And I played that, I remember playing that Uplands went with Jimmy Nelford, and playing on that second hole. I remember he hit 7 or 8 iron, and he hit it pretty right at the flagstick. It tore up the flagstick, went down the hole, and tore up the hole. So I remember, you know, just that kind of a shot. That on that hole, you had to do what Stanley Thompson didn't often do. You had to fly the ball directly onto the green because of the valley or the gully in front. Most other times, at Uplands anyway, and I know most of his other golf courses, he's tried to present and allowed you to choose from different shots, which actually can introduce a lot of confusion into a player's mind, which I think is much more entertaining and interesting than being forced to play one-dimensional golf, golf in the air. Uplands allowed you to play golf on the ground when it was firm and fast, and also golf in the air. For example, the 5th and 6th holes at Uplands were short par 4s, each of them no longer than about 260 yards. Number 5 was a slight dogleg left. If you hit the right shot, you could drive the green or get it right in front in those days with persimmon and balata. The next hole, the 6th, was about the same distance, but it was a dogleg right around a little sort of grove of trees. And if you hit the right shot, you could also have a really good birdie chance, or maybe even eagle if you were long enough. But if you missed it, you'd be in a deep little bunker just to the left of the green. Or you could do what a lot of us did is, we laid up with a 3 or 4 iron and hit a little wedge in there. But like the 10th at Riviera, for example, he gave you the option, all kinds of options on every shot. One of my favorite holes there, which I think exhibits or demonstrates his playfulness, is the 8th hole. I don't know if any of you remember it, but it's a sunken green. And you couldn't see the green from the fairway. There were no bunkers on the entire hole. It was a long par 4 in those days, 430 yards. Nothing for Rob driving a wedge, but for us back then, it was a drive and a 3 iron or 4 iron. And but you could choose to land it on top of the hill beneath which was the green, or to fly it all the way onto the green, which the green was shaped kind of like this table. It was just kind of a rectangle that way, very, very shallow back to front. And there were all kinds of holes like that. The 12th hole was a short par 5, where if you missed it right, you'd be in some trees. If you missed it short, you'd have a tough little pitch up a fairly steep hill. And then my favorite hole, of course, was the 13th. We called it, on the scorecard, it said dog meat, because everybody played a game closest to the hole. And now this is going to sound like boasting, but what the hell. I did get, in my time at Uplands, I got 5 holes in 1 on that little hole, which was only about 110 yards, but the green was about as big as this lectern. And if you missed it, I once saw a guy, a good player, who ended up winning the club championship there, and also at Summit when he moved on to Summit. On a Sunday of the club championship, the 4th round, he made a 12 on the hole. The hole's not more than 100 yards, 105 yards, but it was a postage stamp green, and he hit it into the valley. Then he bladed one over the green and back and forth, and he made it 12. 16 was a tremendous short dogleg par 5, but at about a 75-degree angle, where you could take it sort of right towards the green, or you could hit it out and try and cut it and run it down the hill towards the front of the green. 17, which to my mind, it's now the 8th hole, but I understand they're playing it off artificial turf on a front tee. It's a 225-yard par 3 in a world all its own, just trees on both sides, an elevated tee. Do you remember that hole, Sandra? Did you ever play there, Upland?
Well, sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a fantastic par 3, really. And it was a kind of hole, it was perfectly placed, because you would worry about that hole if you got some kind of a score going. And back in those days, it was really a 1 iron or a 2 iron or even a 4 wood. The green was elevated, although it was below the level of the tee. And to the right of the green, again, no bunkers. To the right of the green, there was a hillside. You could play it off that hillside. But if you hit it on the wrong spot, golf should always be a game in which you may get a good break, you may get a bad break. And if you hit a soft spot on a hill, it'll trickle down on the green. And if you happen to hit a hard spot on the hill, it could run right across, clear across the green into the gully on the other side, which I always thought was a good lesson. Golf really isn't meant to be a fair game. Really, I remember writing articles saying that golf courses and golf holes should be declared, some of them, as heritage sites. And I always thought that one should be, because it really was one of the best par 3s in the country, or best par 3s I've seen anywhere. And then 18, back then, 465 yards as I recall, a par 5 with a very lumpy fairway, the ball would bounce all over the place, and a river, again, in front of the green, a little river, just a little stream. And I remember a plaque in the middle of the fairway, one of those silly things, but it said to go or no. In other words, if you get there, are you going to go for the green or not? And you had to hit a pretty good shot back then. It was a par 5, a legitimate par 5. Even Augusta, the 13th, was only, about 465 yards for many, many years. So you had to hit the ball with the right spin to hold the fairway, and then you had to carry it all the way to the green, but there was no trouble really right in front of the green. So, or you could lay up. So what I really have liked about Stanley Thompson is this notion of his playfulness. I mean, you can think of holes here or right across the country, the Devil's Cauldron, in Banff, Cleopatra, in Jasper, Highlands Links, of course. And as you go around his golf courses, you really see that he wanted the golfer to come off and have a good time. Maybe have a shot of whiskey after, but not get too beat up, and to have the opportunity to put in a decent score, maybe even to better his or her handicap. At Highlands Links, where's that long walk at the golf course along the river?
Multiple, but 13.
13, yeah. George Knudsen loved that golf course. He played a Shell's Wonderful World of Golf there, and he said one of his favorite parts of the golf course was taking that long walk. It must be about 800 yards or something, right? It's long.
How long is it, Grant? Long.
350 yards.
George used to say that, you know, he and his wife Shirley, they'd be happy just to go out there and walk and have a picnic there. That's how much he loved it, and that's what Highlands Links is really all about, isn't it? You're in a park, and you're playing, I mean, the fairways are bouncing and lumpy, and the greens are enormous, and you have to pick your angles, and if there's one word that describes Highlands Links, on so many of his courses, it really is, I think, just fun. And if there's one word that describes the attitude an architect has to have to play those golf courses, it's an attitude of playfulness. And I think it's to Stanley's credit that, you know, he's so well known, so well regarded, one of the charter members of the American Society of Golf Course Architects with Robert Trent Jones Sr. in 1948, that he would build all of these golf courses that wouldn't get worldwide attention because they didn't have major championships. And yet here we are with the Stanley Thompson Society still talking about him. People around the world who are into architecture, the Golf Club Atlas piece, people and others realized that Thompson really was creative, that he wanted people to have fun, and I think that's why they recognize him in an era when we're moving into, I think Aaron Hills next week is going to be playing, or the USGA will have the option of playing it at 8,000 yards, right? Now, it used to be you could play a golf course where the pros played and there might be a 200 or 300 yard difference. Now it could be 1,000, 1,500 yards difference, you know, which I think is too bad. But that's a whole other story about the ruling bodies not controlling the ball and the equipment. I wonder what Stanley would have done right now. Would he have stuck to building 6,500 yard courses meant for members? And you know, Jeff Ogilvy, who's one of the most articulate people about golf course architecture, says that he likes nothing better than, excuse me, to go out with a set of clubs. He said he would be happy to play. He bases his schedule, he told me, not so much on the tournaments that are being played, except for the obvious ones, the majors, but on what golf courses he can play in the area that he's going to. He loves coming to the Canadian Open because when it's at Glen Abbey, because he can play as he did a year or two ago, play the Toronto Golf Club. You know, Tiger has said the same thing. He said that, he told me that he wishes that the PGA Tour would have, you know, a couple of tournaments a year where they have to use half a set of clubs or even fewer and play a 6,200 yard golf course. He said the best player would still win, the lowest score would still win. He also said that why not have to go out there and play with a half a set, 5 or 6 clubs, you know, and just play the tournament that way. And, you know, maybe Jay Monahan, the new commissioner, will sort of have this playful attitude. Because I think that's what's been missing in a lot of golf courses over the years, over the last 30 years, let's say, as the ball started going so far. And yet when we play golf courses that have that sort of characteristic, we come off, and I always think that one way, at least for me, to judge a golf course if I enjoyed it, is do I have more energy when I've left the golf course than when I came out there. And Stanley Thompson courses, I always have more energy, even at my advanced age, than I did when I started it. There's probably, I don't know too many Stanley Thompson golf courses that you couldn't walk, you know. I mean, Uplands was a phenomenal walk. You know, there's the tee, there's the green. And so many of his golf courses are like that. People come off the golf course and they say, man, I enjoyed that, I could walk it, it was tremendous. So, you know, that's kind of the essence of my little presentation here, is that I think the Stanley Thompson Society, the more that it promotes this notion of Stanley Thompson as an architect who was so creative, who so much wanted people to have fun at the game, and who played with your head by being playful out on the golf course, I think those are tremendous values that we need to keep in the game. It's really not all about distance, no matter how far the ball is going. It really is about having all kinds of different shots and options, and even crazy holes and quirky holes, and Stanley was well known for that. And I think the game is at its best the quirkier it gets. So that's about all I have to say right now. I'll be glad to take questions afterwards. I'll bring up Jeff Mingay now, and thank you very much for paying attention.